Pack your bags, Mom. We found a place where you won't be a burden anymore. Those were the first words my son Titus said when he walked through my front door on a Tuesday morning in March. He wasn't alone. His wife, Sloane, stood behind him in a cream-colored blazer, holding a manila envelope like it was a gift. I had just finished my second cup of coffee. The Ohio sky outside was gray and still. There were papers already signed. Documents I had never seen. They said I was a danger to myself. They used the word forgetfulness, my grief, my mourning, my quiet mornings alone since my husband Harold passed, and they turned it into a legal weapon. Within 1 hour, Titus had my car keys. Sloane had my cell phone. And I was standing in the sterile lobby of Cedar Crest Senior Living, wearing the same cardigan I had put on at breakfast, wondering how a morning could go so wrong so fast. Before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you who I am. My name is Evelyn Chris. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant, the kind people call when the numbers don't add up and someone needs to go to prison. I have testified in federal court 14 times. I have unraveled offshore shell companies, fake invoices, and Medicare fraud rings worth tens of millions of dollars. I am not forgetful. I am not fragile. I am not a burden. My husband Harold was a corporate attorney who believed that information was the greatest form of power. He taught me that the best chess players never react, they plan. Standing in that cold lobby while Director George confiscated my wedding ring for safekeeping, I didn't panic. I watched Titus and Sloane through the window as they drove away, already arguing about the listing price for my farmhouse on Zillow. And I began to plan. The cafeteria at Cedar Crest served mystery meat every Thursday. But the billing department was serving something far more creative, pure fiction. I found a discarded invoice on my third day there, half tucked under a cartwheel in the hallway. Most people would have ignored it. I am not most people. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed and read every line. The charges were staggering. Premium physical therapy for residents who hadn't left their rooms in weeks. Enhanced nutritional supplements that I later confirmed were store-brand vitamins. And there it was, buried in the fine print, the same service billed twice, once to the resident's family, once to Medicare. Double billing. A federal crime. My hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't spike. 31 years of forensic accounting had given me a kind of calm that other people mistake for coldness. I folded the invoice carefully, slid it under my mattress, and went to dinner like nothing had happened. I smiled at the woman across the table. I ate the mystery meat. If you're looking for the medication logs at Cedar Crest, check the shredder. That's what Bethany told me on my 5th night. She was a night shift nurse, 26 years old, always running, always behind. She moved through the halls like someone carrying twice the weight she was supposed to. I caught her crying in the supply closet one evening and I didn't pretend not to notice. I handed her a tissue and I asked her what was really going on. She told me everything. Cedar Crest was owned by a parent company called Vantage Healthcare. Vantage was gutting the facility's budget, cutting staff, skipping maintenance, falsifying care records, to make the financial books look clean for a secret sale they were planning. Bethany was covering shifts meant for 3 nurses. She was doing it because she cared about the residents and had no power to stop what was happening above her. I told her to keep her head down and trust me. She looked at me like I was a sweet old woman trying to make her feel better. That was fine. I was used to being underestimated. My husband Harold didn't just leave me a house. He left me a dead man's switch. On my 8th day at Cedar Crest, I slipped into the facility's small library during free hours. The computer there was slow and the chair squeaked, but I didn't need long. Harold had told me once, quietly, over dinner, 2 years before he got sick, that if anything ever happened to him, I should look for a cloud drive registered under the name HV Legal Archives. He gave me the password and made me memorize it. I had never needed it. Until now. I logged in and my throat tightened. Harold had spent the last year of his life quietly building a case against Vantage Healthcare. Internal memos. Financial records. Communications between Vantage executives and shell companies. He had known something was wrong with that company long before they ever touched our family. He had left me everything, every document, every thread, organized in folders with my name on them. He had known I might need it someday. That was the kind of man Harold Chris was. I'm not here to check on you, Mom. I'm here for the deed to the lake house. Titus arrived on a Saturday with a notary public and a warm smile that didn't reach his eyes. He brought flowers, carnations, the cheap kind, and he set them on my windowsill without putting them in water. He told me the nursing home fees were higher than he'd expected. He said he just needed one more signature, that it was routine, that it would protect me. He slid the document across my tray table. The notary uncapped her pen. I signed it. Except I didn't sign my name. I signed Evelyn Vance, one letter off. A deliberate misspelling that made the entire document legally void. I had learned that trick from a fraud case in 2009 where a nursing home operator tried the exact same tactic on an elderly veteran. Titus didn't notice. The notary didn't catch it. He left looking satisfied, already on his phone before he reached the parking lot. I threw the carnations away. Then I went back to my tablet and kept building my case. They thought I was knitting a sweater. I was mapping a money laundering operation. The yarn and needles were real. I had asked Bethany to bring them from the activity room. But the notepad tucked inside my knitting bag was where the real work was happening. I had started tracking every invoice, every staffing schedule, every maintenance report I could get my hands on. What I discovered was elegant in a corrupt sort of way. Cedar Crest wasn't just underfunded, it was being used as a financial dumping ground. Vantage Healthcare was systematically shifting all of their corporate debt onto this one facility, loading Cedar Crest with liabilities while their other properties looked clean and profitable on paper. It was the oldest trick in the forensic accounting playbook. Make one branch bleed so the rest of the body looks healthy. The goal was obvious: sell the healthy branches to investors, let Cedar Crest collapse, and walk away clean. The residents here, people with no voice, no lawyers, no one paying attention, were the ones who would pay the price. I thought of Harold. I thought of Bethany. And I clicked my knitting needles together and kept counting. To destroy a monster, you have to become its master. Harold's digital archive included something I hadn't expected: the contact information for a financial broker named Marcus Webb, a man Harold had worked with quietly on 2 previous corporate cases. Harold's note beside the name read, discreet. Effective. Loyal to the client, not the deal. I reached out through an encrypted portal. Harold had set one up for exactly this kind of situation. Marcus confirmed what I already suspected. Vantage Healthcare was cash-starved. They were quietly looking for a silent investor to inject funds and prevent a mid-year bankruptcy. The opportunity was narrow but real. If someone moved quickly and anonymously, they could purchase Vantage's distressed debt, the very debt they had illegally stacked onto Cedar Crest, and become the company's primary creditor. Harold's life insurance had paid out $4.2 million, sitting quietly in a trust account I had never touched. I told Marcus to start moving. I told him to be invisible. I told him I didn't need Vantage to know who was coming. I just needed them to keep operating long enough for me to take the wheel. The lights went out in Section B on a Wednesday. The profit margins caught fire the same week. I had filed an anonymous maintenance complaint through the State Health Board's online portal, the one that triggers a mandatory facility inspection within 72 hours. I used the library computer at 6 a.m., when the overnight aide was changing over and no one was watching. The inspectors arrived on Friday morning. They were polite and thorough. They found 17 maintenance violations, 4 medication documentation gaps, and 1 unlicensed aide working unsupervised in the memory wing. Director George met them at the entrance with a tight smile and a binder of documents that were, I knew, partly fabricated. She spent the whole day managing the damage. She called an emergency staff meeting that afternoon. She was furious, convinced that a disgruntled employee had filed the complaint. She started reviewing personnel files to find the leak. She never once looked at the quiet woman in room 14 with the knitting bag. The woman who had triggered the entire audit was sitting in the common room that afternoon, drinking decaf and watching the inspectors take photographs. I nodded politely when Director George walked past. She didn't even glance at me. She didn't want a mother-in-law. She wanted a bank account. I heard Sloane before I saw her. She was on a smuggled cell phone in the garden corridor, the one with the faulty camera that Bethany had told me about, talking to someone she called the decorator. She was gutting my farmhouse. New floors in the living room. A renovation of the master bathroom. She mentioned tearing down the back porch, the one Harold and I had built together the summer of 2003, to add a proper outdoor entertaining space. Then she said something that made me set my book down. She said she had found the safe in the study but couldn't crack the combination. She asked the decorator if she knew anyone who could handle that kind of thing quietly. I almost smiled. That safe hadn't held anything of value in 2 years. I had cleared it out after Harold died and replaced the contents with a stack of old tax returns from 1987 to 1994. I had also placed a small GPS tracker inside, zip-tied to the back panel. I had no idea at the time that I would need it. But Harold always said, prepare for the move 3 turns ahead of where you are. He was right, as usual. You don't fire a director. You buy the board of directors. Marcus sent me a secure message on the 14th day. I was sitting in the common room when my tablet, which I had kept hidden in a false-bottom knitting bag, buzzed once. The message was short, you now hold 15% of Vantage Healthcare's secondary debt. Enough to request a seat at the table. 15% is not a majority. But it is enough to make a board nervous. It is enough to demand a private meeting, to ask uncomfortable questions, to slow down a sale. In a company already bleeding from financial mismanagement, 15% in hostile hands is a serious problem. I sent one reply, request the meeting. My terms only. And Marcus, don't tell them it's a woman in a hospital gown. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I attended by secure video call, through a proxy device Marcus had arranged. I sat in the facility's common room with my knitting on my lap and a pair of earbuds in, listening to the Vantage board stammer through their answers to questions an anonymous creditor was asking about their Medicare billing practices. None of them knew the creditor was a Cedar Crest resident. None of them knew she was taking notes. Titus thought he was getting an inheritance. He was actually getting a subpoena. He visited on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced, wearing the kind of expensive casual that tells you someone is trying too hard. He announced, not apologetically, but almost gleefully, that the farmhouse had sold. He said the market had been incredible, that he and Sloane had done well for themselves. I'm glad, I said. Maybe you could set aside a little something for better tea here. The bags they give us are terrible. He laughed. Not a warm laugh. The kind of laugh that means, no, and enjoys saying it. He told me I'd never see a dime of that money. He told me the nursing home fees consumed everything and I should be grateful he was keeping me somewhere safe. I nodded. I told him I understood. What I didn't tell him was that the buyer of the farmhouse was a shell company called Harlow Property Group, registered in Delaware, fully legal, untraceable on the surface. I had set it up through Marcus 3 days before Titus listed the property. The closing had gone smoothly. The farmhouse now belonged to a company that, at the end of a very clean paper trail, belonged entirely to me. Titus had sold my home back to me without knowing it. He had just handed me my own deed. They tried to sedate me. But they gave me the wrong file. Bethany appeared in my doorway late on a Thursday night, her face pale. She was carrying a manila folder she wasn't supposed to have. She had picked it up by mistake from the nurse's station. It had my room number on it, but it wasn't mine. She handed it to me without a word. I read it in under 2 minutes. It was a diagnostic recommendation, the kind that gets filed when a facility wants to place a resident under legal guardianship. It listed progressive cognitive decline and inability to manage personal affairs. It was signed by a Dr. Fenn, a physician I had never seen, whose name I did not recognize from any visit to my room. The date on the paperwork was 7 days from now. They weren't going to help me. They were going to erase me. A false dementia diagnosis would give Titus, and whoever was working with him, permanent legal guardianship over my person and my remaining assets. I would have no voice. No rights. No recourse. I looked at Bethany. She was shaking. I told her to go home, get some sleep, and tell no one. Then I picked up my tablet and called Marcus. We had to accelerate the timeline. I'm too old to climb through windows. But I'm exactly the right age to bribe the janitor. His name was Floyd. He was 61 years old, underpaid, and had worked at Cedar Crest for 9 years. He had been written up twice by Director George for speaking too freely with residents. That told me everything I needed to know about him. I offered Floyd $300 in cash. Harold always kept emergency funds in the hidden lining of a travel bag I had brought with me, and a written statement that I would personally advocate for him in any future legal proceedings related to the facility. He let me into Director George's office at 2 a.m. He stood watch at the end of the hall. I wasn't there for money. I wasn't there for petty satisfaction. I was there for the Black Ledger, the private accounting book that Bethany had once mentioned seeing on George's shelf, the real record of where Cedar Crest's money actually went. It took me 11 minutes to find it. It was tucked behind a binder of staff performance reviews, which was exactly where a person who wasn't an accountant would think to hide something. I photographed every page with my tablet. I put the ledger back. I walked back to my room. Floyd and I never spoke about it again. Your power of attorney isn't worth the paper it's printed on, Titus. Titus showed up on a Monday morning with 2 orderlies and a transport wheelchair. He told me, not asked me, that I was being moved to the memory ward at a sister facility 3 hours away. He said it was, for my own safety. His jaw was tight. His eyes were darting. Sloan had clearly told him something had gone wrong, though I doubted he knew what. He reached for my arm. That was when the door opened behind him. A woman in a charcoal blazer stepped in. She introduced herself as Patricia Osei, attorney at law. She handed Titus a certified document before he could say another word. It was a revocation of power of attorney, signed by me 3 weeks prior in the presence of a licensed notary, the one Marcus had arranged to visit me during what the facility recorded as a volunteer reading hour. The revocation was valid, properly witnessed, and filed with the Ohio Secretary of State's office. Titus's power of attorney was void. He had no legal authority over me, my person, or my finances. Patricia looked at him pleasantly and asked the 2 orderlies to please give us the room. They looked at each other and left. Titus's mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. I didn't want a refund. I wanted the keys to the building. Marcus's message came through at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning, while I was still in bed. I read it twice. Evelyn. We're at 51%. Vantage can't pay. 72-hour window. Say the word. 51%. That meant I now held the majority of Vantage Healthcare's outstanding distressed debt. If the company failed to make payment within 72 hours, which, based on their current cash position, was a mathematical certainty, I had the legal right to initiate an asset seizure. Every property, every contract, every piece of equipment under the Vantage umbrella could be taken to satisfy the debt, including Cedar Crest Senior Living, including the facility where Director George had confiscated my wedding ring, including the building where my son had signed papers to erase me. I typed back 2 words, "Say it." Marcus filed the notice of default at 8 a.m. 72 hours later, Vantage Healthcare would default. The countdown had started. And I ate my breakfast slowly, because there is no reason to rush when you already know how the story ends. Pass the salt. And the keys to my car. I asked Patricia to arrange a dinner meeting with Titus and Sloan at the facility. I told them I had a confession to make, that I had been hiding something and it was time to come clean. They arrived dressed up. Sloan had on a new necklace. Titus was practically glowing. They thought I was going to hand over more assets. They thought the meeting was a surrender. I let them order their food from the cafeteria. I let them settle in. Then I set a folder on the table between us and I said, calmly, that I had been doing some reading over the past few weeks. I told Titus I knew his contracting business had been operating at a loss for 2 years and that he had 3 outstanding liens against it. I told Sloan I knew about the $180,000 in personal debt she had accumulated on 3 credit cards she'd kept in her maiden name. I told them both I knew the farmhouse sale proceeds, my money, had been earmarked to cover those debts before Titus had even moved me out of my house. Sloan set her fork down. Titus stopped chewing. Neither of them reached for the salt. Director George wasn't just a villain. She was Sloan's secret sister. The GPS tracker in the safe had done its work quietly. Marcus had cross-referenced the data with property records and phone logs from numbers linked to Sloan's accounts. What he found turned a bad situation into something much darker. Margaret George and Sloan Chris, née George, were half-sisters. They shared a father, grew up separately, and had reconnected 6 years ago. The nursing home plan had not been Titus's idea. It had been theirs. They had spent 18 months building a strategy. Sloan had married into the family. George had positioned herself at Cedar Crest. The goal was to have me declared incompetent, transfer my assets under a guardianship order, and quietly funnel the money into a joint account the 2 women shared. Titus was never meant to see a penny. He was the vehicle, not the passenger. He didn't know any of this. The man who had signed papers to put me in a nursing home had been played just as thoroughly as he had tried to play me. I thought about what I was going to say to him. Then I thought about the right moment to say it. Timing, Harold always told me, is everything. If you're going to rob someone, at least have the decency to be clever about it. After dinner, I asked Sloan to give Titus and me a few minutes alone. She smiled and excused herself, probably thinking I was finally going to crumble, that I was going to ask my son to take me home. I slid a second folder across the table. This one had Sloan's name on it. I watched my son's face as he read. I watched the color leave his cheeks. I watched the moment his eyes processed what Sloan and George had actually been building, the joint account, the guardianship timeline, the exit plan that left him with nothing once my estate was liquidated. He was supposed to be the front man for a con where he was also the mark. Titus set the folder down. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was very quiet. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked at him. I thought about all the years I had loved him and all the months he had spent treating me like a problem to be managed. I told him that sorry was a start, but that I needed something else from him. I told him I needed a choice, and I needed him to make it before the next morning. They tried to move me to another state in the middle of the night. I had anticipated this. Sloane was smart. Not as smart as she thought she was, but smart enough to sense when the walls were closing in. When she came back to the table and Titus wouldn't meet her eyes, she understood that something had shifted. At 1:40 a.m., Bethany sent me a text, "Van outside. George and 2 men. They're coming for you." I was already dressed. Patricia had arranged for 2 things to happen simultaneously. The first was a call to the Ohio State Police from an anonymous source, tipping them to a suspicious after-hours transport of a vulnerable adult. The second was a direct call to the FBI's healthcare fraud unit, accompanied by a digital package containing photographs of the Black Ledger, along with Harold's archived documents and the Medicare double billing invoices I had collected over the past weeks. George and her men were in the parking lot when the state police arrived. I was standing at my window watching. Sloane was sitting in the passenger seat of the van, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware that the package I had sent was already being opened in a federal building 300 miles away. I wasn't calling the police about kidnapping. I was calling them about $4 million in Medicare fraud. The transport van didn't make it past the first traffic light on Cedar Road. 2 state police cruisers were waiting at the intersection, lights off, engines running. They pulled the van over in under 30 seconds. The officers weren't there for a welfare check. They had a warrant, issued that afternoon by a federal magistrate, based on the evidence package that Marcus had transmitted to the FBI on my behalf. The warrant covered Medicare fraud, financial elder abuse, and conspiracy to fraudulently obtain guardianship. Director George was removed from the van and placed in the back of a cruiser. Sloane refused to get out for 45 seconds, which I was later told was logged as resisting. The 2 men they had hired to transport me were detained for questioning. Titus was in the facility's family waiting room when it happened, where I had asked Patricia to keep him. He watched through the window as his wife was put in handcuffs in a facility parking lot. He said nothing. Patricia told me later that he just sat with his head in his hands. I felt something then, not satisfaction, exactly. More like the particular quiet that comes when a long, complicated problem is finally resolved. The company wasn't failing. It was being repossessed. Vantage Healthcare officially defaulted at 9 a.m. on Thursday. It wasn't a surprise to anyone watching the financials. It had been inevitable for months, engineered by a board that had stripped the company for parts. The difference now was that their primary creditor was not a bank or a hedge fund or a nameless institutional investor. Their primary creditor was a forensic accountant from rural Ohio who had spent 4 weeks in one of their facilities. Marcus filed the takeover documentation at 10:15 a.m. The board of directors was formally dissolved by 2 p.m. Under the terms of the debt purchase agreement, all Vantage assets, including 6 senior living facilities across Ohio and Indiana, passed to the designated creditors holding entity. The board's emergency counsel called Marcus 3 times that afternoon. He did not take the calls. There was nothing to negotiate. At 4:30 p.m., a certified letter arrived at Cedar Crest addressed to the lead creditor, requesting her presence at the Vantage main office the following morning to sign the final transfer documents. Marcus forwarded me the letter. I read it, folded it, and asked Bethany if she could press my navy blue blazer. I told her it was time to get dressed. You told me to act like a resident. Now I'm telling you to act like an ex-employee. I had heard that Director George had been released on bail and had returned to her office that morning. Her lawyer had apparently told her that charges were not yet filed and that she had every right to continue operating. She was sitting behind her desk, smiling at her assistant, acting as though the previous 48 hours had been a minor inconvenience. The office doors opened at 11 a.m. I walked in wearing my navy blazer, the one Harold had said made me look like I owned every room I entered. My attorney Patricia walked behind me. Marcus was on a call in the hallway, managing the legal paperwork. I carried nothing in my hands. George looked up. I watched her face change, the sequence of it, the the denial giving way to confusion, confusion giving way to understanding, understanding giving way to something small and afraid. I walked past her. I sat down in her chair. I said, very calmly, your personal belongings can be collected by 5 p.m. Security will assist you. I placed my hands on the desk that used to be hers. I looked at her and waited. She stood up and left without saying a word. That was the right decision on her part. Sloan, I bought your debt too. You owe me the house, the car, and the ring. The morning after the takeover, I met with Titus and his attorney in the facility's conference room. Patricia sat beside me. The room smelled like bad coffee and difficult conversations. I told Titus what I had done. All of it, the debt purchase, the shell company, the farmhouse buyback, the black ledger, the FBI referral. I laid it out the way I used to lay out evidence in federal cases, in sequence, without emotion, letting the facts speak for themselves. Then I told him about Sloan's personal debts, which my holding company had also acquired through a secondary market broker. The $180,000 she owed on her private credit cards was now owed to me. Her car loan had been bundled in a package Marcus purchased in week 3. Even the jewelry she had been buying on a store line of credit, including the necklace she'd worn to our dinner, was financed by a lender whose debt I now held. I gave Titus one option. Testify fully and truthfully against Sloan and George. Cooperate with investigators. In return, I would release his personal debts and give him 6 months to rebuild without my interference. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. And he said yes. This isn't a nursing home anymore. It's a community. And I'm the president. Sloan and Director George were formally charged 6 weeks later, Medicare fraud, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy. Titus's testimony was detailed and damning. He was granted a cooperation agreement. He moved into a small apartment in Columbus and, last I heard, was doing honest work. I renamed the facility. It's called Harold's House now. I hired a full nursing staff, actual staff, properly compensated, with benefits. I brought Bethany on as head of patient advocacy at twice her previous salary. I replaced the mystery meat with real food and the cheap vitamins with actual care. I restored every resident's confiscated personal items, including my own wedding ring. I moved back into my Ohio farmhouse on a Thursday in October, the same month the leaves go gold and the air smells like wood smoke and the kind of silence that means peace, not emptiness. But every Monday morning, I drive back to Harold's house. Not as a resident. As the woman who owns it. They thought they were putting me out to pasture. They forgot that I'm the one who owns the field. If this story hit you somewhere true, hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge with Fat. Drop a comment and tell me, when did you know Evelyn was always going to win? Thank you for watching.